Join me, 48 Hours correspondent Erin Moriarty, on my podcast, My Life of Crime, as I take on true crime investigations like no other. This season, I'm looking into the labyrinth of crime and secrets within families. I'm cutting straight to the evidence and talking to the people directly involved, including investigators and the families of victims. Listen to My Life of Crime with Erin Moriarty wherever you get your podcasts.
Inspired by the life of the savvy and ambitious Colombian businesswoman Griselda Blanco comes a new Netflix original limited series. Griselda tells the story of a devoted mother who, with her lethal blend of charm and relentless savagery, creates one of the most powerful cartels in history. Witness Sofia Vergara's captivating transformation into the godmother of the underworld. Griselda, streaming January 25th, only on Netflix.
A note to listeners. The following podcast contains content that may not be suitable for all audiences. Discretion is advised.
The more I see and the more I read and the more I hear, I have to say this is the most screwed up case I have ever seen in my entire career. I was impressed by the polygrapher's information as far as what she thought, and I totally agree with her. I think there's a lot of credibility in that recording. At this stage, why not just tell the families what they have, or at least something that would ease their minds so maybe they could get on with their lives?
You are listening to Partners in True Crime. We are your hosts, Rob and Cindy Dorfman.
Today we're going to talk to Jodi Barth again. Jodi has 3 decades of investigative experience, both as a detective and a CSI investigator for the Illinois Department of Law Enforcement.
Since we last spoke to Jodi, she has joined our team of experts who are helping us look into what really happened to Molly and Colt. We are thrilled to have her knowledge and experience.
Jodi has been actively looking into all of the materials that have been gathered in this case, and she is helping us sort out the labyrinth of information, as well as new leads.
First and foremost, we have the utmost respect for law enforcement and the legal process, but we also understand that as humans, we are all fallible and mistakes are made.
We also know that there's still a lot about Molly and Colt's case that we do not know. Our only goal is to help Molly and Colt's family find some answers to this horrific and senseless crime.
Well, we appreciate you coming back on and talking to us because, I know you and I have been talking pretty much a couple times a week since you've been on.
Yes.
Regarding this case and the wealth of information that we've been kind of shuttling to you. So we wanted to kind of touch base with you and catch up and hear your thoughts on some of the stuff that we've been filtering over to you. Specifically, obviously, we sent you the raw recording of the eyewitness, and then we also sent you the entire document from Joe Russell's, I believe it was a state or federal grand jury documents.
Right, the federal grand jury.
So where do you want to start first?
You can start anywhere. I guess after the more I see and the more I read and the more I hear, I have to say this is the most screwed up case I have ever seen in my entire career from the beginning. I almost have more questions now than I did when I first became aware of it. There's so much information out there, and trying to cross-match details, it's very difficult. I mean, the most basic information that we should know, maybe it's out there and I just haven't found it yet, or I haven't documented it yet, but some of the information from the witness indicates that they were never, and maybe I'm misunderstanding him because that's entirely possible, that car was never out in that field. They never got that far where the car was found. He's saying they never got that far. They stopped at the gate.
Yeah, I mean, that's a couple of people have said that car never, because this is a thing. They said it took 2 weeks to find that car. There were people looking around for Molly and Colt for a while. And when Paula finally went out there, suddenly they were alerted that she was there with like 20 people. And then the car miraculously shows up. Didn't make sense to us either. We never really understood that whole part. We know that he did go in there, maybe to the gate, maybe even just a little into the gate. We highly doubt that he left the car in that position for those 2 weeks.
Right. Okay. So because that was very confusing to me. And then it's like the whole switching out of the cars. I'm like, okay, they took one away and brought another one. Well, which one did they bring? Because we know which one they found, right? That was the Accord. correct?
Yeah, and that was the one that was in the high-speed chase because they did alert that on the dispatch scanner that night.
Okay, so that's kind of a big piece of information. That is it accurate or is it not accurate? That might want to, you might want to. That's a question in my mind. It's like, what's all this about switching out cars? But then there's the other thing that's I'm very confused about now, and that is the timeline. Geolocation information that puts those 3 phones, Con's, Molly's, and Colt's, in that general area by the creek bed, correct?
Correct.
The night of the 7th.
Yeah, in that area.
And the morning of the 8th.
Yes.
Yeah.
So then part of the information was that the killings all occurred when it was dark out. So I'm thinking, well, how did they allegedly occurred?
Let me just interrupt you for a second because Molly actually spoke to somebody on the telephone in the morning.
Right.
So she was alive the next morning. Colt, we don't know.
Okay. So that's what I'm saying is there's just a lot of information, but I have to say, I mean, I'm very intrigued by the whole thing. I was impressed by the polygrapher's information as far as what she thought, and I totally agree with her. I think there's a lot of credibility in that recording. I think there might be a little mixture going on for whatever reason, whether he was high at the time or he's getting details mixed up. I think there might be a little bit of stuff going on there, but I think for the most part, what that recording states is probably pretty accurate.
Even if half of what he said is true, it's completely damning.
It's completely damning for a lot of people. And I mean, when I read, and I'm switching back and forth here, but I'm looking at this as a whole picture. When I read the details that were included in the affidavit involved in Willie's sting operation, as well as the information in that grand jury testimony, the fact that Joe Russell was allowed to plead to a single misdemeanor case and got a year's unsupervised probation is beyond anything I could ever imagine. I mean, it's just the level of corruption to me seems like it's almost endless.
Have you ever seen that type of treatment for someone who did what Joe did in your career? Can you give an example of what happened to cops who broke the law?
I have never seen that. I have never seen that in my career. Ever, never. And I've been personally involved in the arrest of 3 police officers, 2 of whom were my colleagues. And there was nothing they could do or did do that would reduce the outcomes. The only thing that I know of from not personal experience, but from historical evidence of really, really bad people getting off with virtually nothing is when you're talking about organized crime and the highest levels of the mafia and normally the FBI, because that's who did most of those, where they were protected through really bad crimes to get more information, allegedly to get bigger fish. And that's when you do a sting operation. I've been involved in sting operations before where we've used low-level narcotics users to get to dealers, to the dealer level. The higher you go, the better it is. But this just doesn't seem like, I know we're talking about perhaps Mexican cartels. Those are pretty big dealers, but even those guys aren't that big that you would reduce the level of criminality that's alleged in those documents down to a single misdemeanor plea. I've never seen anything like it in my life.
So do you think that he cut a deal where he may have given someone else up?
I certainly could imagine that happening, and that's the only thing that I can possibly think of that they would let him go unless there was some other kind of issue. In other words, are the people investigating him, are they dirty enough and they know he knows it to have them go easy on him? He allegedly was getting his drugs from a Mexican Texas. That's all in the documents. I mean, that's all in the transcripts. That would be a good bust. But I don't know that it would be enough when you look at all the other stuff that's alleged in those documents to let him off that easy. I don't understand it. Being an armchair quarterback is always risky because you really don't know the inside information all the time. But just on its surface, it's amazing to me. It's just mind-boggling to me.
What's most crazy for us when we go through that transcript is the fact that the witness at the grand jury puts Joe working with Con and Colby,
Yes.
cooking meth, procuring and selling it. And then
Yes.
you have the other part of it where they ask her about Molly and Colt. And so
Yeah.
there was an effort there, I feel like, to connect the two. Because
Yes.
why would they bring it up? So it's almost like they tried to connect him to that case through
Right.
all of his illegal activity, but they didn't take it far enough.
They didn't follow through with it. And it seems to be the case the whole time. They don't
Right.
follow through with this stuff. They get to that point, like Rob's saying, and they're kind of connecting the dots, but then they stop. So you're like, well, why are they stopping? Like this whole thing with Con Nip. The reality is this. He's the last person that saw Molly and Colt. That's
Exactly.
a fact. Okay. His property, his family's property where this car went has never been searched. And they can't
Right.
get a search warrant to search it. Why?
Right.
Why? Why do you think?
The reason I think they can't get a search warrant is because nobody can connect. They can connect the kids, and I call them kids, Molly and Colt. They can connect them to Con, but they can't connect them past that point at the end of the chase, past that car. They can't. There's been no information that puts them anyplace else that they can use in an affidavit to allege that they didn't walk out of there. Anybody with a single working brain cell knows that those two individuals did not walk off of that property. They did not leave there alive. We all know it, but knowing it and not even proving it, because you don't have to prove anything to
But
get a search warrant.
What
You
about
have
the
to-
eyewitness? Isn't that enough? I mean, he
That
gives
is.
such detail.
But that's not even,
That-
that was only a year ago. Joe's grand jury hearing was in 2016, where the witness basically said almost exactly the same thing as the eyewitness did. Those two elements right there, isn't that enough probable cause to get a search warrant or at least bring them in for questioning?
I agree. I think it is. I think that what takes it from the eyewitness to the grand jury testimony and the affidavit is that you've got somebody, those go to probable cause because there's somebody that a defense can cross-examine. They've stepped up and they've identified themselves and they can be checked out. With the eyewitness right now, it's just hearsay evidence because it's not, nobody can cross-examine him. And if you're going to charge somebody criminally, you have to be able to cross-examine their accusers. What the eyewitnesses said does not go to probable cause yet to get a search warrant, because if he would put it down on paper or do a legitimate recording and you could take that to a judge or an affidavit, put it in the affidavit, that would be different, but that hasn't happened yet. So right now, but going back, and I'm digressing here a little bit, going back, simply what you said, the affidavit in the sting operation and the grand jury testimony regarding Joe, to me, is plenty to tie them to the disappearance of Molly and Colt and should be considered probable cause to get a search warrant. I believe that. I believe that even right, wrong, or indifferent, even just when they were going for the search warrant on that property by the burn pit and the creek bed, my personal opinion is simply the dog's hits on different areas there should have been enough to issue a search warrant for that area. Narcotics dogs, scent dogs hits have been admissible in court for years as probable cause. So I personally think there should have been a search warrant issued at least for that property and perhaps at least for the shed or the house. You've got information that takes it right into Joe's house.
Yeah.
And Con's house, his grandfather's house.
Yeah, the property.
The property. So yes, I think it should have, but it hasn't been followed up like that. I'm at a loss for why. I've never seen anything like this. You've got 3 weapons that I can count that I know of that have been mentioned, or 2 at least that have been turned over. Whatever happened? Well, we know one of them was simply returned to the supposed owner of the gun. Were any tests done on it? Did anybody else see it?
No.
And that's my question to you. Do you think that gun that was turned over to the owner, do you think that they could do DNA testing on that now? Do you think that they would be able to get anything in there?
Well, with, as I said, with guns, it depends. I mean, according to the testimony, that gun was used on Colt and Molly. Depending on the distance away from the bodies when it was used, the likelihood of DNA being on the outside of the gun probably very slim to none. But if the gun hasn't been fired since then, there could have been DNA blowback up inside the barrel. If they tested the gun for DNA, you would want to test up in there, because if a gun is very close to a surface when it's to a body, when it's fired, it actually causes a suction that pulls some of the material from the body up into the barrel of the gun or onto the surface of the gun. If it's from a farther distance, that won't happen. But if it's close up, it will actually cause this suction to bring that stuff up. So, it's worth a shot. The worst that can happen is they get a negative result.
Yeah.
Okay, that doesn't mean it wasn't the gun. It just means it's inconclusive, or there's no evidence to prove it was.
Yeah, and that's the problem. First gun that Phil Klein, private investigator, it was handed over to him by one of the NIPS.
Yeah, the mother's boyfriend.
The mother's boyfriend, along with the machete, who said, I want this out of here. We don't even know what happened to that gun. I think OSBI has it. We don't know if they've tested it or it was inconclusive.
But the second gun now that Paula turned over, that they gave back to the individual, I wonder if it's worth reaching out to him and seeing if he would be willing to do an outside DNA testing of it. I mean, is that something that you could organize, Jodi?
I could check it out. Sure. I mean, yeah, it's always worth the shot. It's not going to hurt the case. It can't hurt the case. It can. I
mean, that's what kills me when they're saying like, Paula, it's your fault that we haven't solved this case. It's like, come on.
Because you created a Facebook page.
It's ridiculous.
That's what they told her.
I mean, it's just ridiculous. That's the part that just bothers me so much, is that she's a victim and she's being kind of left to fend for herself and being admonished for it too. Mm-hmm. And that's the part that I don't like.
I know that, especially with like the FBI, and most of the time with state investigators too, I know they're very tight-lipped, and locals. I mean, you want to keep your case as pristine as possible when you're conducting an investigation. I get that. However, it's been 9 years, right? 9 years.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's not like nobody's talking. A lot of people are talking. There is a ton of information, and for some reason, they've been able, apparently, to dismiss some of these things. How, I don't know. It would be nice, even if they don't open it to the public, it would be nice if they would sit Paula down and Missy, the two who are most responsible for all of this information, sit with them and explain to them exactly why they've decided not to pursue certain avenues here. It could make perfect sense once you see it all. But for the life of me, I can't figure out what that would be right now, looking from the outside in.
They won't even share the information with another law enforcement. Jackie Bates, who's been looking into this case now, I mean, he's doing it recommissioned, but he's doing it on his own time. They won't even tell him anything.
That's insane. And I'll tell you what that shows. That just shows a cover-up to me. Somewhere, somehow, for something, there's a cover-up going on, because there's no excuse for that. Not at this stage of the game. Chances are, I tend to believe that there probably will never be any remains recovered. So at this stage of the game, even though it is possible to get convictions without bodies, that's been done numerous times, it's very difficult. I mean, at this stage, why not just tell the families what they have, or at least something that would ease their minds so maybe they could get on with their lives? And there's a lot of danger here. I believe that some of these people that are still there and operating are very dangerous people. And for people, I fear for Paula and I fear for Missy.
It's Misty.
Or Misty?
Yeah.
Okay.
But we agree with you. We agree with you. They're all bad actors. You know, some of them have turtled up. Some of them have moved out of the area. Like Khan is living in Oklahoma City now. Some of the others have moved out of state. Colby's still in the area, we know. And we also don't know who else is protecting them. Right.
I mean, clearly, if the dollar amounts that are being thrown out there are accurate, lives mean nothing to these people. Nothing. Supposedly $60 got Molly killed. So
That was interesting, wasn't that? We didn't put that
yes.
on the podcast, but why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
That was part of the information that was received in the raw recording from the reported witness, and basically that it had to do with money that was owed to a Mexican cartel, and it had to do with $60 of drugs that was owed, and Molly was killed for it. And apparently it sounded like Molly wouldn't have been killed had Colt cooperated or was having a fit, basically, or wouldn't shut up. It was the quote. But it was over $60, at least for her. Am I correct?
I think so.
He also supposedly had some money, a large amount of cash on him that was taken. And one of the other guys, was it Nick, owed money? It all comes down to money, and not very much, when you're considering the lives of two young people. It's just mind-boggling to me. But
put that in perspective for a second. Like, I mean, when we listened to it the first time, it was, I've listened to it probably 10 times now. And that statement stuck with me for a long time. $60, a human life is extinguished, and nobody's doing anything about it. And why is it that nobody's doing anything about it? And honestly, if they were doing something about it, this would have been resolved a long time ago. I don't believe they're doing anything about it right now at all.
I agree 100%. And I think personally, this is my own personal opinion, it seems to me like the reason people are getting excited now, authorities are getting excited now about it, is not because they haven't solved this case. It's because they look bad in the public now. More and more people are aware of the fact of how badly this has been botched from the beginning. It's just amazing to me.
Yeah, I definitely think that there's a liability issue that they're thinking about right now, and they're covering their butts, and it's better to not say anything and just kind of run out the clock.
But how is that fair? I mean, what if it was their child or their sister or brother? This is the United States of America. We're not supposed to have these things happen here. This is ridiculous that this family has been suffering for this long with no recourse here. And Paula will never give up. I will tell you that right now. She will never, ever give up on this.
I know. I get that feeling too. And I do fear for her because she is rattling cages. And I don't know what the answer is going to be here, but they clearly have not. If they have done what they should have done, what was humanly possible to do, then tell the family that. At least give them that. But they're not. So that tells me perhaps they didn't do what they should have done, and now they look bad. So now we're going to get a little tough with people. It's insane. But I still think that there's possibilities. Like you said, if we can get that gun, do I really think we're going to find anything at this stage of the game? Probably not. If the gun's been fired again, it's probably worthless anyway, as far as evidence goes. But if it hasn't, give it a shot,
Yeah, our biggest problem is that Paula has played by law enforcement's rules for a very long time. She even shared a story. She was at the grand jury when they were going to come up with their findings. And a law enforcement came up to her beforehand, and because he had gotten wind of what it was going to be, and he warned her. He said, listen, he's not going to get anything. And he basically told her, don't make a big thing out of it. I'm like, don't give the nips something to talk about if you make a big thing. Why would you say that to a victim when the person who was equally responsible for the disappearance and maybe even the death of these two people, based upon everything that we're hearing, why would you say that to a victim's family? They have every right to be outraged about someone who's been running a criminal enterprise in that county for 16 years. Because if he had a button down and stuff like that, none of this would have happened.
Right. Well, I guarantee you, Con is the linchpin for all of this. Con knows everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He knows everything. So does Colby Barrick. He knows everything.
Mm-hmm.
And Joe knows everything. And several other people. Willie probably knows everything.
Yeah.
The woman who owns the hog farm probably knows everything.
Mm-hmm.
There's a ton of people that probably know everything. It's just a matter of getting somebody to come forward. And then here's the big part. It looks like getting someone in authority to follow up on it. At this point, you've gone through the locals, you've gone through the state, you've gone through the FBI, supposedly. the AG would be the next.
She's been there a few times.
So she's not interested, right?
But there's a new AG and there's a new governor. She has another bite of the apple.
That would be, I mean, that's it as far as I know, other than just the court of public opinion. But still, you have to get, and I don't know how far up the corruption goes. It sounds like to me, just stinks. And I hate to say that. I truly hate to say that because I'm a firm believer in law enforcement. There are bad cops just like there are bad everything in this world. But the vast majority of police officers and law enforcement people are good people and honest people.
We agree.
Absolutely.
We have a lot of our friends and family are in law enforcement.
Right.
We know them.
And it pains me. But like I said, I've personally been involved in investigation and arrests and prosecution of 3, 2 of whom were my colleagues. One was from another department that happened in on my jurisdiction.
Can you tell us a little bit about the circumstances of that?
Sure. Well, one of them was he burglarized administration office of Illinois State University with a friend one night and took $55,000. He was a police officer. They were coming back he had keys, of course, and they were coming back from the building and made a stupid error, and one of the campus police there pulled a traffic stop on him. And when they found out who was in the car, the sergeant was called over. Long story short, they had the bag of cash in the back seat. And so he was arrested and charged and went to prison for 5 years for felony burglary. And then the one from another department, he was a sergeant. I worked with him many times. He was the sergeant in charge of the sex crime unit of the police department. And silly as it seems, we had a rash of indecent exposures turning up all over the campus. And they seemed to be hitting, my partner and I started looking at the pattern, if there was a pattern. And we kind of zeroed in on one. So we set up surveillance one day. And sure enough, he hit right where we thought he was going to hit. Right when we thought he was going to hit. We had to chase him down and had to tackle him naked on the railroad tracks, but we did. We got him. He didn't go to jail, but he did lose his career over it. And then the third one, which is heartbreaking, it wasn't a petty theft. It was a series of petty thefts over a long period of time. He was just simply stealing from parking meters, but he had acquired over like $35,000. We found out about it, set up a surveillance, caught him, and he was released that day, but told to come back the following Monday to meet with personnel and the chief. And I was in early that morning at my desk finishing up my report, and he walked by me. I had a habit when I was in the office, because women's clothes are not made to support .357 Magnum weapons on you. It was heavy, and whenever I was in the office, I had a habit of taking my gun off and putting it in my drawer. He walked by me that morning and walked to the locker room, which was maybe 30 feet not even 30 feet, maybe 20 feet from me, and shot himself in the head with a gun that he had in his locker.
Wow.
He killed himself before he knew that he probably was just going to be fired. And not charged, because he said he had the money and he would give it back, and they were going to let him do that. But so those are the 3 that I was personally involved in. And then, of course, I had 17 years of internal fraud investigations, which resulted in numerous arrests and prison sentences for people that I investigated there for internal fraud, mostly internal thefts, things like that.
But in all those circumstances, and obviously the last circumstance you told me about where the guy took his own life, probably because of the shame of it all, the process worked out.
Yes. Nobody covered it up. It was not pleasant, but no one covered anything for anybody else.
And so this case, Molly and Colt's case, how would you describe it?
Oh, Lord. I mean, to me, it's a no-brainer as far as there was ample opportunity very early on to think that there was foul play involved with those 2 individuals. The fact that it was immediately put out by the sheriff that they had run away is nonsense. Joe Russell stopped any investigation past that police chase. And you were talking about that one statement about the $60 that haunted you. The one that haunted me was the statement that was made about that the deputy was almost on top of them, and Molly and Colt were still alive then. And it was the point at which that chase was stopped that we lost it. And he's right.
Yeah.
That's where it stopped, right there. And he prevented from that point on. There was no search done. There should have been a search at least at daybreak, if not before, in that general area, based on...
They knew who it was. You hear the 911 call. They say his name. They know where he's going. Why wasn't Joe, like, first thing daybreak at Khan's house?
Well, he probably was there. Right. But there's nothing anyone could say to me right now that could convince me that this was not a purposeful intervention in this investigation right at that point. Any place else, there would have been ample opportunity to know that those kids were probably in trouble.
Well, it's like Gabby Petito. They had the FBI out there within a day, and they found her.
Right.
In that area, I mean, I've been there. That area where Gabby Petito was found is treacherous. I mean, it is not like flat land. It is treacherous land. And they found her. They didn't do that for Molly and Colt.
Right. The fact that no one even wanted to look is just amazing to me. I mean, even the friends went out there, supposedly, and looked, and even went to Khan's house, or his grandfather's house, where he was staying. There's no words that I have that I can explain why they would not do an organized search the following morning. At the very least, personally, I can understand why they maybe wouldn't want to do it in that area in the dark of night. But they have helicopters. They have infrared. I'm sure that they have access to helicopters with infrared equipment on it that they could search for life down below in the trees. I mean, they do it. You see it on cops all the time.
It's a habit of Khan doing this. That was his way of getting kicks because he knew that there would be no reprisals because his cousin was the sheriff. And the way Joe ruled was if you were friends with him, you could do illegal things and get off. And if you weren't, one person who worked for the sheriff's department, who was on our podcast a couple weeks ago, who was a member of Colt's family, she worked for Joe. She was friends with Joe. Her father was friends with him. Said that if someone would get stopped on a traffic stop, and if he was friends with him, he would let him off. Or he'd just radio in, says, I'll let that person go, no matter what they were doing. Yet if he didn't like you, he would send you to prison if you didn't have your medical marijuana card and you were caught with weed. And you go off to the penitentiary. It was all contingent upon how Joe felt about you that day.
And the other thing I thought, I guess I haven't seen the right documents yet or the right reports or the right information, but little things like they never mentioned, was Molly wearing jewelry? What happened to her jewelry? Most of the time, people take trophies when they're doing stuff like that. They'll take a trophy. I know she had a piercing, and it looked like she had, I don't know if it was a real diamond or a stud or whatever, a diamond stud, or did they follow up with area pawn shops? I mean, it's just things like that I don't see happening here. And maybe they did, and I just don't know it. But
they didn't investigate the big strokes. I guarantee you the minutia was not even considered.
Right. But any investigation, especially a complicated one, any investigation is a lot of trouble. You do way more legwork most of the time, and you write report after report after report after report with negative findings before you get a hit on anything. Now, that's just part of the deal. You expect that when you're in law enforcement. You don't expect it to be easy.
Logic would have it, and this is what we've all been saying, is that because Paul has been generating a lot of the leads here and a lot of the tips. Investigate them, rule them out, check it off the box. The problem is that there's no feedback after that.
Exactly.
There's no yes or no. Oh yeah, that guy, what he said, we put in the file. It may have some relevance. We can't connect it to anything yet, but we're going to keep it in the file. There's not even that conversation. It's just, we can't tell you anything.
Exactly. The machete. I don't know if the machete was involved in Molly and Colt. It might have been. It sounds like there might have been an axe involved that was, the head of it was turned over to the FBI, and nobody knows what happened to it. The machete, the OSBI had that. Did they do any serology tests on it? And I saw a picture of it. It has a hilt. It has a handle that looks like it's removable. Did they take that apart and do DNA underneath that, because blood seeps in very, very small places. And when people are cleaning their stuff off, they don't think about that. And they go right over it, the top of it, but it's underneath in those cracks and crevices. Did they do that? And they could alleviate those questions, at least with Paula, but they're not. That kind of stuff, I just don't understand why they're not following up with it.
And then you get into the whole topic of victims' rights, because Paula's a victim, their family's a victim, and they haven't been treated properly.
Right.
And if anything, they've been treated like the enemy. In fact, some law enforcement has even so much as said that both her and now us are the enemy of this case.
Right.
Which is ridiculous.
We're already established television producers. We're not doing this for fame or money or anything. We're doing this because we met Paula and our hearts broke for her. And we stayed in contact with her and she asked us for help. And we agreed to help her. And that's what's so upsetting about this, because we're looking at all of this information, piles and piles and piles of information. And no one wants to help her. No one wants to help her. They just want to say she's the problem, because she is saying there's an injustice that's been done. And that's what happens to victims. And that's what puts a fire under me. And that's really why I'm doing this, because this has to change.
Yeah, it's straight up gaslighting.
Right. It's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking for me on a couple levels. I mean, as a person, as a human, even when I was in law enforcement, I felt bad, truly bad for a lot of the people that I had to put in jail, that I did put in jail. And there were times when we could make a difference and maybe not send somebody down that road and get them on a better path. So you have to have empathy just as a human being first. But it also is heartbreaking for me on a professional level that I see what looks to be, to me, like people who should know better, not stepping up. Throw the damn book away for a minute and be a human being about it. And at least, if nobody else, trust Paula. I mean, you trust other people all the time. Trust Paula enough to give her some details. So maybe it can ease her mind a little bit. But I am truly at a loss when it comes to this case. I've never seen anything like this. And over such a wide diversity of officials. You're talking about a lot of people who have to be involved in a virtual cover-up.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I think the local press, they do every year, they do a Molly Miller and Colt Haynes story, but all they do is just say it's the anniversary. You know?
Right.
I think it's also behooves the local press and the journalists there to dig a little deeper as well, because they're the ones that are servicing the community. We don't live there. Paula doesn't live there. We don't have to deal with the corruption. We don't have to deal with it. We have to deal with other things, big city stuff that is just dwarfs this investigation. But at the same point, this is a small community. And there's a lot of really nice, hardworking people there, and they're getting marginalized by the bad operators. And if they can't look to their law enforcement to protect them and go to them when they need them, because a lot of people that have come out, we've gotten so many tips where people are like shaking on the phone, saying they're afraid to talk, but they feel like they need to.
Right.
And they said, I'm afraid. He goes, and this is like, he goes, I wanted to come out early on. He goes, and it's like 9 years. So they waited 9 years, and now they're coming out and they're telling us information. They're saying that I'm scared. I was scared. I was threatened that if I said anything, that they were going to hurt me and my family.
I believe them 100%. I believe those people.
How could you not?
Right. I believe those people. I was watching a video this morning on YouTube. I was searching for that one video that was discussed by the witness, and I don't think I found that one, but I did find another one. It was a video of another organization with some dogs out there searching around a lake that was by Wilson.
I think it was Moxley Lake. Yeah, we went out there.
I thought, okay, it was on the property it was a landowner that had the property where the fire range. That was an interesting remark about the firing range out there.
Yeah, there's a gentleman out there. He's
Toby, I think his name was. Or
Toby.
Like that.
Yeah, he does a lot. He's actually over there helping the Ukraine effort right now. So he trains a lot of special forces people that train there and stuff like that. So he's got an active range, and so he does a lot of philanthropic work that way.
And he mentioned the shirt they found hanging on the tree, showed a picture of it. Looked to me like it was a size 6, which would be right up that alley. It was a woman's shirt, and I think the tag on it said size 6, which is very small.
Yeah, Molly was tiny.
Right, but he said it's disappeared.
Yeah.
What happened to it? And they said looked bloody.
Everything down there, we were talking about yesterday with someone else about when they went down and they discovered the burn pit, and then Paula went down there and she was told she had to leave, and then they called OSBI. Paula went down there and she was met by the sheriff. I think it was Joe at the time, or it might have been another sheriff. It could have been someone else, a deputy, because OSBI couldn't get down there right away. And so they wanted to make sure what she was doing. And she went down there by herself. She went in this gigantic field by herself. And they saw the burn pit. And then when the OSBI got there, he just went and, instead of doing it the way you're supposed to do it, if there's evidence and you're going to yield DNA, he grabs an old Mountain Dew can that was like on the ground. And fills the dirt in there and then walks away and goes, all right, well, we'll take this back. But she never heard anything about that afterwards. I can see if a victim's family is not at a crime scene and they're collecting evidence and they don't want to tell them because they want to see if they want to vet it out and they don't want to get their hopes up and everything. But she was there. She saw it. Why not at least give her that information? She said, oh, yeah, that it came up nothing. That's it. That would be enough for Paula to say, okay, but withholding information like that, it's going to drive her harder and push her harder to find answers and also not to trust them anymore.
Exactly. And that video I was watching this morning, they came upon an area by a fence that looked like it had been recently dug up, overturned. Basically, the dirt was soft and overturned on the top. One of the searchers suggested that they call law enforcement to tell them about it. Paula was there. Paula was on the video. She called somebody. She mentioned Drake. I can't remember who she called. There's so many names going around, but she mentioned the person that she was going to call. And they told them, just go ahead and dig it up. Now, that right there told me they had absolutely no interest in doing this right. You would never do that. You would never do that in a million years. If you want to really gather evidence, you would never tell somebody to just dig it up with a shovel.
Yeah, we had Brian Smith on last week, and he was part of that search and rescue team, and he told us he told a similar story that there was a lot of stuff going on where they didn't feel like Paula was running that whole thing. She did every search that's happened. She's organized. She got hired Phil Klein, the private investigator who worked in this case, I think, for like a year. He interviewed everybody. He did the best job he possibly could, but he still wasn't getting the information. He still doesn't. He still says he talks to OSBI about every 2 weeks or once a month. But he also says that they're not telling him anything. So that's another thing. I mean, he brought almost all of his information that he did for Paula, which Paula paid for, has been given to them. Rightfully so. They're the investigative body, but they should still be, something still has to happen.
Well, and I'll tell you from experience, when I was with the state police, the Illinois State Police in the crime lab, and we were available on call to any law enforcement agency in the state who needed assistance with crime scene processing. The only requirement we had was that they hadn't started the crime scene before we got there, and if by chance they had started it and they were in over their heads, we would not take control of it, but we would go there and walk them through as advisors on what to do next, because our credibility was the most important. So we wanted to have a clean scene, as clean as possible when we started. When we worked for other agencies, everything we did went back to them. The reports that we generated went to them. They stayed in our files too, of course, or to the state's attorney or whomever, but a copy always went to the agency that had requested our help. The lab reports went to them. The photograph negatives we kept, the prints went to them. Just because of credibility issues, we couldn't release the negatives because they could be altered and things like that. So we kept the negatives, and this was before digital. So,
question for you, because one of the things, and I just want to say, the one law enforcement body that actually did help quite a bit on this case was the Oklahoma Highway Patrol. So that was the only place, the haven that Paula had during this whole thing, because they believed her and they knew who Joe was. They knew all the stuff, and these are all local guys, so they know what he was up to and stuff like that. They were the ones who actually, on the second police chase where Khan was actually caught, it was the Oklahoma Highway Patrol, and that subsequently got him in prison for that chase and Molly and Colt's chase. Unfortunately, they don't have any weight in this. The question I have for you is, what is the equivalent of Illinois' OSBI? Is there an agency like that within Illinois?
Yes. In Illinois, state police, at that time, now it's changed a little bit, but at that time, the structure is still the same. We were all under one umbrella. It was the Illinois Department of Law Enforcement. And there were different divisions under that, or departments under that umbrella. One was the state police, which would be the highway patrol, the uniformed arm of the state police, the troopers on the road. And then part of the state police, they used to be the Illinois Bureau of Investigation before that. Then they became Department of Criminal Investigation, but they would be the equivalent to the OSBI.
And were they under the same auspices as the state police? Were they in the same budget?
Yes.
Okay.
And then, like, my unit was the Department of Scientific Services. So we were the crime lab people.
So that's what I looked this up, because the state Oklahoma Highway Patrol is a different entity than the OSBI. They have two separate budgets.
Okay.
They're under two different. They're completely severed. There's no commingling there.
Yeah, my boss as a CSI, my boss was a state police captain. Same, all the people in DCI were state police. They were just the detectives. It's like a police department where you have your patrol division, your detective division, your lab people. It's the same thing, only bigger, and you cover more area. But it's the same concept in Illinois.
It's crazy. It's all crazy.
Yeah, so, there was control there.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling to me, and it's really heartbreaking.
It is heartbreaking.
It's exhausting. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
It's exhausting.
Yeah. It's exhausting for Paula. I mean, what this woman and her family have been through, it's every single day. Every single day. We're on the phone hours with Paula, hours with people. It's and this is only us in the past year every single day. Yep. Paula's been doing this every single day for the past 9 years. Ever since Molly went missing, and she will never give up.
We're there right there with her, and we really appreciate your expertise on this.
Oh my God, Jodi, you're amazing. Thank you so much for taking all the time to look at all this stuff and help us sort through this web.
It is truly my pleasure. I honestly believe in this, and I think that's what's so frustrating to me is I know there's an answer to this. I know it's there. I just don't know either what I'm missing or what I think is happening right now to me in looking at this is that I've got information overload, but yet when I drill into those individual pieces of detail of information, I can't come to something that I absolutely, this is a fact. This is a fact. I know this. Check it off the list. Or this definitely is rumor. Put that in another pile and don't think about it right now. Just use it for reference if you have to rule something else out. So what in my own mind I'm thinking is I need to somehow whittle it down into littler pieces because there's so much information out there, and some of it I think can be ruled out as just rumor. Some of it is maybe almost mythical. Some of it is proven fact or can be substantiated, like the type of car involved. That's in a report someplace. And you guys know that and you've seen it. I hadn't seen it, but things like that, there's so much information. And I honestly think there's a solution here. I do. I don't think this has to be one that just is never solved.
From our standpoint, because we've been dealing with this case since 2018, and we have all the information. We have phone records. We have all of it. It always comes down to what we said before. And the facts are, Con was the last one to see them. Mm-hmm. Joe's called off the chase. Colby Barrack was there. Those are those facts. That Mom was still alive that morning. She made a phone call to someone to come get her. We're almost certain that Colt was killed that night because there were no phone calls. There was nothing. The last time someone talked to them was when the friends went to Con's grandfather's house and put Con on the phone with Colt. And Colt was saying, "You know where you left me, you motherfucker. Right. Come get me." So he was the last time to speak to Colt because people were there. And they heard that call. Right. Amongst all of the rumors and the unproven statements and the hearsay and stuff like that, it all comes down to those people and that area. So it's like we know where the crime scene is. We know that the people we believe that were involved in this. It shouldn't be that hard.
No, if what the witness is saying about the party-like atmosphere there, that's what I'm trying to get in my head. I believe what he's saying happened to Molly. I believe it's what happened to Molly. If that's the case, there was a time where they were having sex with her or they were shooting her up with drugs. There was a time she was tied to the tree. There was a shock collar involved. Is that anywhere around or did that go with her? And supposedly Colt was tied to the tree too at that time. So I'm getting at I can't get the time in my head. You're right. It all comes down to that place and that time and those people, and that's doable.
Yeah.
What's the problem?
Yeah. I just want to end on this is that, we, like I said before, we appreciate all your expertise. You've been super helpful on this, and you are continuing to help us on a bunch of other leads that we're exploring. So we appreciate that too. And hopefully they yield something that will help bring this case to its end and justice will be served. So just
Jodi, you're the best. You're so amazing. Thank you so much.
Well, I don't know about that, but I thank you for getting me involved in this. And I sure hope that we can do something good on this.
Next time on Partners in True Crime.
After we bought the ranch, one of my good friends who's law enforcement here, I just got to know him, and he said, hey, by the way, this ranch is involved in a missing persons case. And I was like, oh, really? And he's like, yeah. He's like, there's rumors that there's 2 people that are buried on the ranch. So I was like, why do I need to keep a gun on me? And he's like, there's some bad characters out here, man. He's like, you need to keep a gun on you. Your wife needs to keep a gun on you. And I thought that was obviously pretty odd. Whenever Molly went missing, he and another person, the one that you confirmed the story with, had taken night vision onto the property that is in question, I guess, the Nips property. There were guys walking around with guns around the cabin that looked totally high out of their minds, and it freaked both of them out so much they left.
If you or anyone you know is suffering from a methamphetamine addiction, please contact the American Meth Addiction Hotline.
If you or anyone you know has been the victim of sexual abuse, please contact the National Domestic Violence Hotline.
For any tips relating to the disappearance of Molly Miller and Colt Haynes, please contact 833-4MOLLY and Colt, and they will be directed to the proper law enforcement agency.
All rights reserved. This has been a production of 722 Media Content. Please visit our website where you can subscribe to the podcast, find show notes, and listen to Vi's original song, Take Me Back, written for Molly Miller.